It was an embassy. At least that was the lie they told the Consuj, and the people of the Gurultek Empire, as if they were fools. GIJoeVibin knew the truth, of course. It was a forward base for them to invade. They would hide behind their walls, building strength secretly, and then launch their attacks. Their spaceships and dropships needed somewhere to land their troops, after all. No, he wouldn't fall for the lies of the United Nations. His commanders hadn't either, though it had taken much urging by the press, and much back and forth in the Senate to finally take action. Now they were going to sort it out. GIJoeVibin could see the embassy now. It was sprawling, a perimeter wall surrounding open spaces large enough to land one of their small dropships in, then a large square building in the middle with a central courtyard. Hundreds of flags flew, surrounding the complex. These were the nations of the United Nations, the constituent parts that made up its whole. Amongst them flew the flag of the Lepanid Federation, an old rival of the Gurultek Empire even before First Contact. Their leaders had been tricked into prostrating and subjugating themselves to the humans, with their promises of unity. Well, GIJoeVibin couldn't be tricked like that. There was, after all, one flag that flew higher than the rest, a damn blue background, with a white depiction of a solar system surrounded by some sort of native human plant. The embassy had been built not too long after First Contact had been made, the United Nations constructing it themselves in a matter of months, on land the Gurultek Empire had granted. Frankly, GIJoeVibin had no idea why his government had ever let them do it. But today, all that would be torn down. GIJoeVibin had reached one of the corner junctions. He took up position behind a parked electrobike, raised his rifle, and began looking through the reflex sight. Two of the sites connected to huge 8-lane roads, and normally these would be packed with traffic going either way. Today, however, they were free of moving cars, and instead a large crowd of protesters had shown up. Several of them were attempting to throw bricks, stones, and the rare glass bottle with a light liquid inside. Every single attempt simply splashed harmlessly against the translucent blue barrier that flashed into appearance each time, some sort of anti-object shield. Beside the entranceway stretched a long queue of civilians. GIJoeVibin was not quite sure what the civilians were queuing for, but he grimly noted the heavily armoured human soldiers using their bodies to separate them from the protesters. Perhaps they were taking captives? Hostages? Whatever the answer, at the sight of Gurultek army units arriving, the queue was panicked, spreading in every direction for freedom. GIJoeVibin could just barely see, through the crowd, more units arriving at the other junctions, sealing off the area. Right at that moment, a tank rumbled along behind him, swinging around his powerful 130mm main gun to aim at the human soldiers. The human soldiers did not respond with force, quickly retreating in good order through the entranceway. GIJoeVibin noted several civilians had gone through the entranceway during the panic, while the soldiers escorted more inside mid-retreat. He dreaded to think what kind of tortures were being inflicted upon those already trapped in the complex. GIJoeVibin watched the last human retreat through the doors. He found their body shape weird, all contained in one big vertical package. They looked like an ancient, extinct precursor species, a vile predator race that had prowled the prehistoric forests of Consul Jan, except these ones were smaller, not much larger than the Consuj. Once a human was being interviewed on a Lepanid television program. Watching the broadcast of Lepanid TV was of course illegal given the whole Cold War thing, but practically the entire nation had tuned into it. Another guest, after getting somewhat flustered at the political ideas this human was expressing, had brought this resemblance up as a point of attack. The human, in response, rapidly pulled up a picture in the background screen, of one of their own extinct predator species, a T-Rex, before declaring, "And you look like if someone glued my arms and an extra eye to one of these things. So let's not play the resemblance game, shall we?" Personally, GIJoeVibin didn't see the resemblance. Gurultek army troops ran every which way, taking up positions. Several members of GIJoeVibin's section smashed in the door of a nearby row house, charging in to set up a firing position from the window. The screams of the residents were loud, but after a few moments they began emerging from the front door, where they were quickly directed away from the area. This was all for them and their benefit, after all. It was best to keep them out of the way. Some of the protesters had dispersed by now, evidently losing their mettle, but a sizable contingent remained, still hurtling objects that disintegrated upon the shields. That was acceptable, so long as they knew to stay out of the way of the professionals. Ghoul-Tech Army forces, back away from the embassy. Lower your weapons. We do not wish to harm anyone, but we will respond with force if you open fire or breach the perimeter. I repeat, back away from the embassy. A loud voice blared from a loudspeaker, in perfect Tolossi, without even the hint of an accent. Of course, that was another of the humans' tricks, learning their latest praised language just to lure them in. That was how they had brought the full Lapanids to heel, cowed the Benalayan Republic, and had snuck their bases into Padilla under the guise of diplomacy. A staff truck pulled up nearby, several soldiers clearing a path as additional tanks and IFVs poured on past. Chayetas turned to see Brigadier General Hucornt clamber out, his aides rushing to deploy the field command post. Hucornt stepped up next to Chayetas' position, surveying the scene. "What's your name, soldier?" Hucornt asked, tapping one of his arms onto Chayetas' back to signal who he was directing his attention at. "Private Chayetas, sir." "Excellent work, Chayetas. Don't worry, we're going to give these things the kicking they deserve." "Thank you, sir." As Chayetas responded, he saw a flit of movement on the rooftop. Looking closer, he realized there were multiple armored figures laying prone up there. "Sir, I can see multiple hostiles on the roof. Look like snappers to me." The Brigadier General paused, taking out a pair of field glasses. He looked for a few moments, then grunted. "So there is. Good spot, Chayetas." With that, the Brigadier General turned and headed for the field post. Another armoured vehicle rumbled past, this time an engineering tank sporting a demolitions mortar of immense caliber, along with a huge bulldozer blade on the front. The crowd of protesters began cheering at his appearance, right as it parked up. The tank's commander sat in an open cupola, machine gun at the ready, waving to the protesters and the other troops. Another, slightly less notable but still important vehicle stopped next to it, an open-top lorry with loudspeakers on the back. After a few moments of setup, it sprang into life. "This is Brigadier General Hucornt of the 43rd Mechanized Division. I have been ordered to terminate the diplomatic mission. You are asked to stand down your troops and permit entrance. You will not be harmed if you comply." "Brigadier General Hucornt, I am Captain Xiao Wei, commander of this embassy security detail. May I remind you that your government has failed to provide sufficient notice so that we can handle our departure. If this is what you wish, we will begin the procedure now, but it will take some time to organize and implement. All we ask is that you pull back your army and do not attempt to breach the embassy. If you wish to inspect our departure proceedings, we can arrange that, but do not send your troops in." There was relative silence, as the soldiers attempted to process what they had just heard. The members of the field command post began discussing with one another. Chayetas, appreciating that the Brigadier General's flair for being in the thick of the action meant he could now listen in. "Great, we got ourselves a lawyer here," one aide said. "A captain? That's the best they could send? The disrespect." A brief glance from Chayetas revealed several of the other aides and commanders nodding at this statement. "Likely a higher commander is on site, they just keep them hidden." "Captain, you are asked to stand down. The termination will proceed. You are outnumbered and encircled. If you comply, you will not be harmed." "Brigadier General Hucornt, we have made clear our terms. Do not send your troops to breach the perimeter. I feel honor bound to inform you that I have notified my commanders of the situation, and they will be made aware should you attempt to breach the perimeter. Do not cause our nations to go to war for the sake of a week's delay on evicting us." Chayetas glanced at the Brigadier General. Hucornt put down the microphone he had been talking into, picking up his command radio instead. "Red 1-1, prepare to breach the wall. Non-explosive means. Load Hesh just in case. Gold-free, disperse protesters to avoid collateral damage." The engineering tank started to move, as the small crowd of soldiers that had been accompanying it set about clearing protesters from a section of wall. Didn't want debris falling on anyone, after all. "Engineering vehicle, halt or you will be fired upon," the embassy speaker sounded once more. The tank stopped again, the commander evidently unsure what to do. Behind Chayetas, the field command post sprung into a flurry of activity, with the brigadier's voice over the radio cutting through it all. Chayetas figured now was a good time to actually ready his rifle, pulling back the bolt and allowing it to chamber around. "Red 1-1, continue breach. Repeat, continue breach. All units prepare to engage." The tank stirred once more and advanced. The commander now gripped his machine gun firmly, aiming it at the direction of the embassy for some sort of target. Tshirt panned his rifle from window to window, looking for any sign of a potential threat. Then a single rocket burst out, from one already open window. Tshirt could have sworn he'd looked over that and not seen anyone, yet still the rocket appeared. In the blink of one of his eyes, it crossed the distance, slamming into the tank's armoured roof just below the turret. There was a deafening explosion, and Tshirt watched as the limp body of the tank's commander was flung out by a jet of flame. The protesters screamed, but there was a visible shudder through several of the nearby infantry. These humans were advanced. Sure, they could travel between the stars after all, but no one had expected them to be able to do that in a single hit. The field command post sprung into a flurry of activity, relaying reports up and down the chain. "We do not want to fire at you. Do not send any more vehicles. Do not open fire. We will allow you to retrieve the casualties." The speakers once more tried desperately to calm the situation. How convenient that they wanted to stop now, before the Greentext army had a chance to flex its power. Were they afraid? "All units, UN forces have demonstrated hostile intent. You are authorized to open fire. Repeat, open fire." The Brigadier General's last word was cut out by a torrent of fire from every rifle, machine gun and pistol in the vicinity. At first, as Tshirt fired round after round from his rifle, they simply slammed against the same shield that had thwarted the rock throwers. However, it collapsed not too long after, and the bullets began to smack against the embassy walls. The guards returned fire like spitting against the rain. They couldn't have been more than a platoon's worth on this side of the building, and yet Tshirt noticed some of his comrades going down. Some screamed as they collapsed, and continued to scream on the floor, blood rapidly draining. Others did not. Two of the tanks thumped out a shot each, a pair of decently sized explosions firing against another bright blue translucent wall that had materialized an inch from the building's walls. Clearly they had thought to construct additional shields for such a possibility, using them solely to deal with the larger threats. There was a brief delay, both tanks presumably loading a second round as their commanders let off long volleys of fire from the machine gun. Then two missiles shot up from the embassy's central courtyard, quickly pivoted in mid-air, before plunging into a top attack on the tanks. In a split second they exploded. One tank simply blew up, in much the same manner as the engineering tank had, but the other's turret was launched into the air, coming back down on a squad of soldiers sheltering nearby. Tshirt did not see anyone get up from underneath. "Listen! We just want the fighting to stop. There are civilians inside. Your people. There are civilians in the nearby buildings. Cease fire for sake." Tshirt could barely hear the speakers over the sound of heavy gunfire. He didn't care. Several of the rooftop soldiers were withdrawing now, and so he focused on them, firing round after round. Most went wide, a few hit, and pinged off their armor. So his rifle wasn't even capable of downing one of these monsters. Great. "Red 2-1, take out the speakers," Hawkwind ordered, and one of the tanks fired a round from its main gun at a collection of speakers, annihilating it. As soon as it had fired, the tank rapidly reversed away in hopes of escaping. Then up came another missile. It was only a few seconds before there was another explosion. "Get me mortars on that courtyard, now!" "Aye, sir." Tshirt noted a small number of Greentext running up to the wall and beginning to set explosive charges. Several of their number were shot down in the process before they could get under the safety of the wall, the human snipers continuing to wreak havoc. By now the rooftops had cleared, but that just meant the enemy was hiding in the windows. 4 mortars thumped in unison from somewhere nearby, their shells arcing up into the air and towards the embassy. Then there were 4 explosions in mid-air, causing a shower of debris. "What was that?" "Enemy appears to have intercepted our mortar rounds, sir. Some sort of laser system." "Then fire more rounds." "Yes, sir." There was another loud boom, one of far too many this day, the ground shaking this time. Tshirt had instinctively ducked for cover, and when he looked back up, found that the soldiers he had seen earlier had successfully blown a hole through the wall. More mortars came screaming in, only to suffer the same fate as the first wave. "Come on, we have a way through," a lieutenant shouted to his platoon, and together they surged towards the breach. Tshirt could see the brief flashes of battle armor past windows, as the defenders rushed to reposition. "We've got them on the back foot. They weren't expecting that." One defender, carrying a large shoulder-fired anti-tank weapon of some sort, ran out onto the grass and began aiming it at the breach. Tshirt changed his aim, trying to pump round after round into them. Except, he realized, his gun was empty now. With panicking fingers, he ejected the magazine, grabbing a new one from a pouch and struggling to load it. Right as he was about to pull back the bolt, the platoon began charging for the breach. Boot after boot sprinted across the rubble, and through the brief gaps between soldiers, Tshirt could see rounds hitting the lone defender. Then the defender fired. A storm of flechettes ripped through the platoon, instantly causing them to collapse. One of the flechettes rocketed past Tshirt' face, narrowly avoiding taking out his leftmost eye before it went on across the street to embed itself in a wall. There was a horrendous screaming from the pile of wounded and dying Corsuch, now left where the breach had been. Tshirt whipped his rifle back up, now fully loaded and ready, bringing it to bear on the defender as they began running, and fired. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 pulls of the trigger. It all blurred into one continuous stream of lead. The defender finally staggered, then collapsed onto the grass of the embassy. Blood. Red blood began appearing, blotting the ground. Finally, some success! And that was what their blood looked like. A smoke grenade landed in the breach, seemingly tossed by the defenders. In a few moments, the thick blanket of smoke was rapidly spreading, yet the fire of the defenders did not slacken for an instant. Tshirt briefly spotted one defender, dragging the wounded soldier out of view. Tshirt fired a few more rounds, trying to down this monster's rescuer, but to no luck, firing blindly into the thick cloud. Once again, he realized he was out of ammunition. He ducked back into cover to reload, right as a pair of rounds came flying his way, narrowly missing him. They signaled that I was the one who downed their comrade, Tshirt thought to himself. Then they shot near perfectly through smoke. Then there were 3 more bullets, punching through the thin protection of the electrobike, just slightly failing to hit him. It was rapidly becoming clear just how wide the gulf in technology was here. Tshirt had a semi-auto rifle, and just as fatigues, the defenders were communicating targets effortlessly to one another, firing bursts of armor-penetrating rounds for his cover, and shooting down mortar rounds mid-air. There was no way this was just an embassy protection force. No, there had to be more to these defenders. This confirmed the very suspicions that Tshirt had from the start. This was their base of operations for launching an attack from within the city. Of course. But right now he had to move from this cover. Tshirt got to his feet, retreating at a sprint for the cover of a nearby house. No bullets chased after him this time. Clearly the defenders had better targets. As he moved, he noted the field command post was repositioning, soldiers carrying the equipment into a nearby house. Tshirt looked a bit more at the house. There was a terrace on top with good options for cover. In fact, it seemed that the post was not moving inside the house, but rather to the roof. He had rather appreciated getting to hear what his commanders were saying. Perhaps it wouldn't hurt to pick a new position. He set off, sprinting across the street. A few more loud explosions roared behind him, while the crackle of gunfire continued unabated. As he ran, his platoon sergeant appeared in his view. "Tshirt, get to 1752, your section need..." The sergeant was cut off, by a pair of large holes suddenly appearing on his person. One in the head, one in the body, right where the secondary brain was located. These humans certainly knew where to shoot to ensure they got their kills. Without the primary brain, the person still had the secondary brain to regain all its personality, memories and so on, though they would be crippled until the primary brain regrew. Both being targeted meant the defenders were both crack shots, and very much committed to eliminating their targets. Tshirt carried on into the building, the sergeant dead already. He rushed up the stairs, all 5 floors, before arriving upon the rooftop terrace. The command post had migrated behind some thick concrete walls, and several troops were hurriedly tossing sandbags to extend the protection. Brigadier General Hu Quan was once again surveying the area with his field glasses, now only poking himself out from cover to do so. Tshirt found his new position along the wall of the terrace. He settled into a prone position, something very difficult for a consul to pull off, yet he managed it. From up here he could look to the north and see out to the ocean. Far, far out along that sea, if you were to sail, you would run into the Laponic continent. If only his forefathers had pushed harder in the days of colonization, they could have brought the whole continent to heel, and then perhaps the rest of the Consul Jan in turn. Then, when the humans had shown up, they could have truly given them a shock. In the street below, he could see fresh burning tanks, while the mortars were still failing to have much effect. There were more this time, at least seemingly 16 a go, but the lasers were either eliminating all of them, or only letting 1 or 2 slip past. Infantry fired from all over, but there was definitely an increasing number of Corsuch bodies on the road. "Sir, 2 flights of daggers are en route. Load out rocket pods in the first flight, then 250-kilogram bombs. ETA 4 minutes. One of the soldiers, one of the famed airspace battle coordinators, announced while fiddling with their radio. "Tell them to hurry it up as much as possible. And Mordy, order Silver Lead to make an assault from the west," Hu Quan yelled to one of his aides. "Aye, sir." "Message from Highcom, sir." A different aide, who Tshirt had earlier seen clutching a radio set like their life depended on it, shouted. "They say the Laponids are mobilizing. Multiple United Nations jets and dropships deploying from their air bases. they are ordering you to accelerate the seizure of their embassy, so that the defenders cannot be reinforced. Tell them to give me more troops then. 8th Infantry is apparently being considered. I don't care for consider, give me deployments! Tshirt briefly caught a glimpse of another defender, with one of those tube weapons, near a window. In a brief rush, he fired again and again, a dozen rounds slamming into the defender, or the area around him. Said defender promptly disappeared from view, likely to reposition. Still, if they were repositioning, they couldn't be shooting. To the far side, the west, Tshirt could see a surge of infantry advancing upon the wall. Machine gun rounds responded, dropping many for good, while forcing others to duck for cover. This time, however, explosions began to rip amongst the carrying attackers. The defenders were now launching grenades into the mix, using them to either kill or disperse the conscious soldiers. If they died, then the defenders won. If they dispersed in panic, then they could be killed. Some ran up to the wall and out of Tshirt' sight, presumably hugging it for safety or attempting to set charges. Then, Tshirt saw hand grenades being thrown by the defenders over the wall. These must have torn through the huddled soldiers. It could not be good down there. A roar from his rear, the east of the embassy, caused him to once more look about. It was 4 Dagger fighter jets, lazily named so because of their shape, and they were flying disturbingly low, just 20 meters or so up. Tshirt could see the bulky rocket pods under their wings, and yet they did not fire. Instead, they continued their course, passing directly over his head in a finger 4. Tshirt swore the co-pilot of one aircraft waved to him. Then they were over the embassy, carrying on into the distance. What the hell was that? Why didn't they fire? Brigadier General Hu Quan demanded an explanation loudly, as Tshirt watched the jets begin to curve around for another pass. Behind, he could now hear the second flight coming in. How to abort the run, sir? They're coming around for a better angle. These 4 were carrying bombs, and by the brief glimpse Tshirt got, about 12 each. As they rocketed over the embassy, they scattered their payloads, small tail fins deploying to slow the descent enough for the planes to get away. This, of course, opened them up to easier targeting by the defenders' laser systems, yet there were just too many targets for them to succeed this time. A pair of missiles rose up after the jets had passed overhead, chasing after the bombers. In a split second, both hit their targets. One dagger exploded mid-air, causing a rain of debris upon nearby buildings. The other shuddered as its tail disintegrated, quickly disappearing out of Tshirt' field of view behind some taller buildings, but he could see it did not have long left. Now the bombs detonated, causing a miniature earthquake amidst the tremendous roar. Debris was tossed into the air left and right, and the firing briefly stilled as all involved parties tried to not be thrown off their feet. Good effect! Good effect! Tell HICOM to get another flight of them in soon. Yes, sir! Tshirt heard another boom off in the distance. The wounded dagger had presumably lost its battle with gravity. First flight is coming back with the rockets. Staggered assault, one after another. Good, good. Hu Quan grabbed his radio. Gold lead, move in when the daggers finish the bombardment. I don't care, take blue streaks if you need to fill the gaps. We need this embassy in our hands now. Second flight is reporting detection of odd objects and general difficulties with their radar, sir. Appears the enemy may be subjecting local raiders to electronic warfare. Tshirt could see the daggers readying for the next wave of the attack. All 4 were in a racetrack pattern off in the distance, the leader breaking off for his run. The plane sped towards the embassy and began firing. Unguided rockets rippled from the wing pods, too fast to count, long slender pencils of death. The dagger's cannon joined in, throwing angry red traces into the embassy. Explosions rocked the wall, one after another, shaking it apart and sending chunks of concrete flying like shrapnel. Then the dagger pulled up, narrowly avoiding crashing. No missiles came up to greet it this time. Perhaps the defenders had finally run out of ammunition. Another came in, repeating the process and battering a different section of wall. The leader had now gone to circling overhead, while Tshirt could see the remaining 2 carrying on the pattern loops. One of them broke off. Now its turn to launch an attack. Something came screaming in from the direction of the sea, and heading right for the now descending dagger. Tshirt couldn't get a good enough look at it. The object was clearly well in excess of the speed of sound several times over, something especially evidenced by the roar it generated as it did. The dagger broke off its attack run and began dumping flares, but it only managed to launch a single pair before the warhead of what was now clearly a missile detonated, spraying high-velocity debris over the offending aircraft. It didn't stand a chance, instantly disassembling and careening out of the sky. By Tshirt' vague recollection of the city's layout, the nose section was going to come down in a small park, while the debris cloud just scattered itself across any nearby houses and exploded. Before there was any opportunity to contemplate, 3 more missiles came in. This time, the daggers, having slightly more warning, had turned their tails to the missile and began to run. Gunning their engines to maximum, definitely exceeding the legal or even safe speeds over a city, they dove, somehow managing to go even closer to the rooftops on their attack runs. Deafening booms rolled over the city, rattling everything as pilots desperately tried to escape the oncoming missiles, spraying chaff and flares wildly. It was not enough. 3 missiles, 3 destinations, 3 exploding planes. There was silence at the command post for a few seconds. Tell Powercom they need to get emergency services to those crash sites. Powercom was the commander responsible for the city's defense and general security. Those crash sites were now aflame. Jet fuel, ammunition, and surviving rockets joined into a mess of explosions and chaos that would quickly cut through anything in its way. Yes, sir. Second Flight is attempting to locate the source of the missiles, sir. They say they can't see anything on radar with all the jamming in the way, but suspect it might be something out in the ocean. Wait. The airspace battle coordinator paused for some time. Second Flight had been destroyed. There are naval assets in the area, 4th Fleet. Get on to them and ask them what the hell is going on there. It's their responsibility, why can't they sort it out? Sir, I'm not sure you should be talking about failing to deal with problems. 1A began. Shut it! Just didn't need to look to know the glare coming from Huquan would be so powerful as to effectively dissolve the 8 on the spot. Goalie wants to know if he should abort the attack, sir. 4th Fleet has been attacked. Both nuclear cruisers are sinking. Carriers gone. All but one destroyer sunk. Lapidate forces across the border into Kronis in force. Kronis was an overseas territory on the continent of Lapinand. Its presence as a colony had eternally been a source of tension, even prior to the UN's arrival. If the Lapinese were crossing over, this truly was an all-out war. Sir, gold lead. Oh, hold him for a few minutes. Get all red assets in place. It's now or never. Does anyone know what is going on anymore? I think we're at war with the United Nations now. More explosions rippled across the western road, the defenders launching another volley of grenades. Tshirt took a special notice of how their grenades seemed to precisely detonate in mid-air, right where it was best to cause an airburst. A tank attempted to intervene in defense of the infantry, appearing from out behind cover. This simply earned it an anti-tank missile that it could not survive, before the gunner even brought it to bear. Brigadier General Huquan! Suddenly, out of nowhere, that familiar voice blared again. Except this time it wasn't just coming from a miraculously surviving loudspeaker. The voice was coming through the radio network. This is Captain Xiaowei, commander of this embassy security detail. I'm offering you a chance to end things right here. As of this moment, there are a pair of FA-45s in close proximity to us, waiting to dump missiles onto your headquarters. I have a company's worth of reinforcements on the way. You may not think that's much. I've so far held this building with 1.5 platoons. If you wish to keep trying, feel free to. Just know that at the bare minimum, it will result in your death and the destruction of the attacking force. If your government is smart, the war will end there. If not, my commanders will keep obliterating your armies, until someone on your end has the good sense to turn the war off. Stand your troops down, or we can both set to work handling casualties. There was silence. 1.5 platoons? That was all it had taken to hold the embassy? Brigadier General, you may think you have time to ponder. You do not. My commanders have sent a large quantity of bombers against your country's 1st and 2nd fleets. They will reach firing range in a minute and a half. Stand down now, or 15,000 more of your countrymen will be in the water. Another minute after that, and Dretafik airbase will be leveled. Huquan did not say a word. He paused, completely still. Several of his aides took this opportunity and ran, hoping to survive any missiles that may be coming their way. After half a minute of this, he finally picked up his radio. All units, cease all offensive operations against the embassy. Pull back and leave a 500-meter separation. I repeat, cease all offensive operations. There were too many craft in the air to count now. None of them from the Gurul-Tech Empire. The UN dropships had arrived just minutes after the withdrawal, as the captain had promised. Tshirt could easily tell which were the reinforcements, and which had been the defenders by the simple expedient of looking at who had clean armor. Blood, dust, and debris caked the defenders, and yet they had still gone out and about performing their duties. Tshirt had seen several evacuated on stretchers, some with blankets covering their head, their armor barely visible. Most had clear damage to their armor, dents or missing pieces. Then, clearly, some sort of order had been given, and they fired onto dropships to be flown out, presumably for the first bit of rest and hours. Tshirt had counted how many of the dirty soldiers he had seen. About a platoon and a half, accounting for casualties. They really had done it. They were, surprisingly, Very few civilians amongst the wounded. One of them, that looked like a human except with dark blue skin and 4 eyes, had explained while Tshirt assisted with the wounded consuls that they had simply retreated to a blast shelter buried underneath the embassy. Tshirt had not known there was a blast shelter before launching the attack. Neither had his commanders. A pair of soldiers passed by him, escorting a civilian to a waiting dropship. It turned out that the civilians queuing were not prisoners taken by the United Nations, but refugees trying to flee the Empire. They were seeking asylum in UN territory. Tshirt had not known about this before launching the attack. His commanders had. Tshirt took another look at the soldiers in their battle armor. The huge, curving chest plate, which so many shots had bounced off. Smooth armor plated across the legs and arms that clearly didn't impede them for an instant. The helmet, with a visor that only displayed the eyes and barely looked larger than a human's head, yet contained so much armor and computer systems. It was, he reflected, no wonder these people had performed so well. Frankly, he suspected that the embassy's defenders could have marched on the Senate if they so wanted, without anything in the city being able to stop them. But of course, they had not. His commanders had projected their ideas of what they would do onto these people, and he had been too foolish to not see through it. The press had not swung the politicians, and then the army around to the idea. The politicians and the army had swung the press in one great big performance he had happily swallowed. Another craft, about the size of a Greentext army helicopter, flew past overhead, his marking suggesting it was just another medical transport. He had heard it was called a US-22, while the larger ones, the size of a cargo plane that did not land, were the US-15. Other US-22s had brought military firefighters that had deployed across the city to respond to the blazes caused by the downed daggers. Allegedly, at least a few of the 15s had spent the last hour touching down at the now closed civilian airport, offloading all sorts of vehicles. Tshirt figured he should probably get to know those vehicles' names next. There were a lot of rumours. Some of the wounded consul's soldiers were making wild claims about a whole battalion's worth of soldiers being killed by the airstrikes and the humans covering it up, or that saboteurs in the ranks of the Greentext Empire were to blame for it all. But then there were the rumours from the United Nations people, with a few soldiers idly mentioning that the Lapinese haven't stopped pushing yet. It appeared that they were taking the chance to liberate one of the Empire's colonies, and, according to at least one soldier, pretending their radios were broken and thus could not be told to stop. Not that their commander seemed particularly bothered. And as Tshirt watched yet another dropship touch down, this one ejecting a cargo of engineers to help clear rubble, he suspected that he, and the Empire, had made one mistake too many.